So hi everyone, welcome. We'll talk about dependency management today. Maybe just real quick, did anyone use Composer yet? Like, oh man, that's a lot.
That's quite a few.
Okay. Well, I hope you will still learn something. Now we'll see. But at least you can ask questions. So just short intro, I'm Jordi. I do, well, Symfony a lot, Composer as well. And I have my own company now for a year where we do consulting, and yeah, that's about it.
I'm Neil Zatterman. I'm the PHP development lead. I've been working on that project for I guess 7 years now. That's how I got interested in Symfony. We just launched a hosted forum company called Forumatic. You want to go check that out if you're interested in communities and one forums.
All right, and we are both co-leading the Composer project. And the image did not load, man. It's like, okay. So we had like 2 laptops that failed on us, and now images don't load. That's good, starting well. Anyway, so first of all, I want to make a difference between managing packages and dependencies. So it's very, it's a small conceptual difference, but basically what we do in Composer is we say we take all your dependencies of your project and we manage all that in one set. You don't actually install packages one by one. You just say, those are my dependencies, and you get everything installed at once. Yeah, maybe another quick show of hands. Who is using pair? I think there was one guy. Do big hands because we don't see much. Okay, so not many people. Yeah, a couple, okay. And do you use it just for PHP unit, or do you actually install other things? Okay, well, cool. So I think that kind of shows the sad state of affairs in terms of package management in PHP. That's basically like nobody is doing it, and that really sucks. Because it's a great thing, and we really should do more of that. So what we did with Composer is we built like a few blocks that allow this whole process to happen. So first of all, like Composer itself is the command line tool. It's what you use mostly. I mean, it's what you interact with mostly. It's also a library, so it is meant to be like embeddable in, I don't know, a CMS or something, if you would want to use it to manage plugins, for example, or, I mean, Niels' motivation, I guess, is to use it in PHPBB as well, so. So it's not just like a command line tool, it's a command line wrapper around the library. And we're also trying to push best practices with it, so stuff like, I mean, the PSRs, so you have, PSR 0, and like this week or last week, I don't remember, the PSR 1 and 2 got voted in, so those are things we're trying to push, maybe with badges or whatever, seems to be trendy. And yeah, that's pretty much it, like that's the main thing. Now, do you want to add?
Sure, I can add to that, or?
Yeah.
So like the next thing is packages.
Oh,
do you want to?
Oh no, I thought you wanted to comment something.
I'll interrupt
I'm
you.
sorry. Okay. Joint talks are not easy. So Packagist is basically the package repository. So that's where you want to go to find packages. I mean, right now it's not very easy to find packages on it. It's not. We still have a lot of work on that front, but Composer is kind of the key element, so we work on that first. Basically, it allows you to publish packages very easily by just adding like your GitHub URL of your repository, or Git or SVN, anything. And it will crawl it like every few hours, or you can also add like a GitHub hook. And then basically, that's all you have to do. Like, you just add it, and it will call. Everything is automated from there on. So we really try to make it super, super easy, which, if you compare it to Pair, is like, I mean,
so there's no separate build process or publishing step. You don't need to run some separate service for packages to become available. It's really just you commit, you tag your repository, and that's all you do to release a new version.
Yeah. So if, like, pair used to be, you know, submit your package, wait until some dudes check if it's up to their standards. And I mean, I think it's great. It ensures some quality of the code, but here we want to have an open ecosystem where everyone can just add, and, you know, we want to foster open source that way. Yeah, that's roughly how it looks. It will get better, really. But you see, we're also on the right there, we're tracking installs since a couple months, which is also quite cool because you see if your project is actually being used by people, which is, I think, very motivating. And finally, we have Satis, which is a micro version of of Packagist. So this is mostly useful for companies that want to run their own little private server with like your own private packages, because obviously you don't want to open source everything. That's perfectly fine. You should open source what you can, but you know, it's not always possible. And that's what people think. So if you don't believe us,
believe
maybe
these people.
Believe them. I think like overall, what I wanted to say is just we got really good feedback, and it's really cool. So thanks to everyone that suffered the early month. I think now we're getting to a point where it's quite usable without too much headaches.
Okay, so after this brief introduction of what Composer as a whole is, I just want to get started with how do you actually use it. And the first way that you will probably come in contact with Composer through is if you want to install some project that is using Composer. The example that we're using here is the standard edition of Symfony, which I sure hope all of you have seen before. If you want to install that using Composer, so in 2.0 you always set these deps files and your vendor install, your bin install to install the vendors. There's also a Composer JSON available now, and with 2.1 that will be the standard way to install a new Symfony project. So you download just the standard edition, which is just a small set of files in your app directory and the directory structure, a few files in web. And after you've done that, in this case with a git clone, you install Composer. And basically all you have to do is download Composer. Composer comes as a FAR file, like PHP archives. The problem with PHP archives is that they depend on a lot of PHP INI configuration files, and in certain environments they just don't load without any usable error message. So we recommend that you copy and paste this little curl line from our download page and run that instead, which checks these PHP settings and then downloads the FAR file for you. So instead you could just download the FAR file yourself, but then it might not necessarily work. With the install script, it tells you if any of your settings are incorrect. So after you've done that, you've got a Composer FAR in the directory that you're in. And all you have to do to install the dependencies of the project that you're working on is run php composer FAR install. That's the only command you really need when you work with an existing project. And what you'll see as output is, first it takes a second to compute which dependencies to load, and then it goes and downloads these from various locations, typically from GitHub in these cases, and stores all of these in your vendor directory. In the next step, we'll take a look at what it generates. So this is how it stores them. It's slightly different from what you might be used to from Symfony at the moment, as we also separate projects, or like the vendors, separately. So there's a Symfony directory, but also a Symfony monologue bundle directory. So we structure them like the package names. And there's a special file in there, Autoload PHP, which takes care of autoloading, which we're going to get into detail about later. The Composer directory contains a few metadata files for Composer, like a list of the installed packages, which you mostly don't need to care about. Instead of checking out your repository, then running Composer install to install the dependencies, there's an even easier way to get started with a project that is itself published as a Composer package. So for example, the Symfony Framework Standard Edition package is published somewhere. So rather than doing git clone, you can just run create project, which is going to do exactly that for you. It's going to clone that package or download the zip file, depending on if you're using a development version or not. Install that and then load dependencies for that project. So it's basically the two steps that we saw before in one. So I've seen how to use this. Next question is, how do I actually define my dependencies? And the way to do this is using a composer JSON file. It's a very simple JSON formatted file where you can define which packages are required to run your project. You locate it in the root directory of your project, where it's automatically found, for example, by packages when it's indexing GitHub repositories. And all you do is you name the package that you have as a dependency, and you specify a version constraint. This can be just an exact version that you want to use. It can be something like 1 star that we have here, which is like any 1 version, but not 2 something. And that way, you can specify which dependencies you have. And when you're in Composer install, these will be installed, including all of their dependencies and dependencies of their dependencies, etc. The second part is require dev. When you run install with --dev as a parameter, it will additionally install those packages, which is very useful if in your development environment you want to install certain tools that you only need for running tests or for certain development tasks that you don't want to install or that you don't want people using your project to install when they just want to use it. You can specify these separately and require dev. In the last line, I mentioned this earlier, Composer can either download some zip file, tar.g zip file, uncompress it on your disk, or it can git clone, svn checkout, hgfetch the projects for you. If you specify -- prefer source, it will do that if available. So that's how you start a project. If you want to publish it, you need to add a bit more metadata. You should obviously add a name so that other people know how to reference your package if they require it. You add a type, which by default is library, which just unpacks it. This allows certain customization and filtering on the website. So like, for example, PHPB has PHPB extensions as a type, and then those can be filtered and separately installed or handled slightly differently. You can add some information like a description and keywords, which will also be available in packages and will be searchable. Like a key feature of packages is that you can actually search for things through a full text search in all the descriptions, keywords that are of the packages. And you can add information like the license. There's a standardized format for that, which is also like a best practice that was mentioned earlier. If you saw SPDX, it's a standard for these license identifiers. But that's mentioned in our documentation, so if you choose a license, use one of those identifiers. You can add your author information like standard metadata that would add to package. And the rest, the require is exactly what we saw before. You can also require a particular PHP version, which is what happened here. And the last part defines autoloading for your package, which is handled automatically by Composer. We'll get, again, into the details just after this. But basically what this says here is that the predis namespace will be loaded from the lib directory inside of this project. And yeah, as the note below says, a project root definition, like we saw before, and a package definition for something you publish is exactly the same file and same location. And you can use this for just loading the dependencies for this project just as well as without the name, etc. You don't need to specify a version here if you're using something like GitHub, as we said. Packages is able to automatically identify versions based on tags. So you don't need to touch this file when you make a new release to change the version information. It will automatically get this information from your version control system. If you want to manually publish something, then you can also add a version in here.
Okay. So this is one problem that you may have had in the past, which is when like many people in the team work on the same project, but you know, suddenly you have a bug on someone's machine and you cannot reproduce it on the others. And you go crazy and debug for hours, and then at some point you just notice, oh, yeah, he had the wrong version of that installed. And that can get quite painful to debug, and you lose time for nothing. So what we did in Composer is have this log file, which, I mean, if you use Symfony, you have the deps log. It's really a similar concept, right? It basically lists everything that was installed, specifically down to the revision number when you install from a branch. And when you just do install, it will basically load this file instead of the composer JSON. So it will completely ignore the JSON and just load the log file, which is also JSON. And then when you want to update this, you basically run like composer update, and this will again like discard the log file, take the JSON, update the packages to the latest possible version according to your requirements, and then dump a new log file. So this one you should really commit it. The whole point of this is to commit it.
So don't add this file to your git ignore.
Yeah,
you commit this file so that other developers have this file and can install from the log file rather than from the composer JSON.
Because we see a lot of people like, should I compose it git ignore?
Just to make this a bit clearer, like I said earlier, you can specify a dependency on something like 1 point asterisk. So that means that version 1.0.0 is valid just as much as version 1.2.0. And obviously 1.2.0 might have changed something that breaks your code. And as long as composer JSON has a vague version requirement like that, people really want to rely on the log file to use the same version across different machines.
So yeah, the benefits, I mean, as we said, it's basically you will have the same everywhere on your build servers, on your production servers, and on your coworkers' machines. So that's.
So I mean, it's happened to people before, like that. Even if it's more constrained, so let's say like 1.0 point something is what we want, and everybody works on 1.0.2, and then there's an upgrade to 1.0.3, which has some accidental backward compatibility break that they didn't really mean to do. But everybody's working on 1.0.2 except this one person who installed later and then got 1.0.3, and it breaks there. And that's the whole point of this, to avoid these problems.
So autoloading, as was mentioned, it's basically handled for you. So we really tried to make this kind of a convenience feature, something you shouldn't think about. So of course you have to configure it, so you still have to know it, like PHP has to load classes. But like that's really all you have to do. So you define the autoloading. You have different methods. So the PSR0 is if you follow the PSR0 standard, which includes the old pair style standard with the underscores. Then we have class map, which is like for basically everything else. It's saying there are some classes in that directory or that file, and just find them. So it will just scan all the files and figure out all the classes where they are, and it dumps this information, so you will have like a class name is in that file. And so when it needs to load the file, to load the class, it will find the proper file. So that's working very well. And then we have this include path feature, which is like, yeah. But we had to add it because basically some old projects, including some not so old projects, like Zen Framework 1, you have all those requires, like require once, etc., on top of the file. And that means they need to have the files they depend on, they need to be in the include path, otherwise everything blows up. And so this worked with pair because you have everything in the pair global setup, which is in the include path. But here we just dump everything in vendor and we don't really care where things are, so this was a problem. So now if a package defines that, basically it means we add it in the include path. It's really not efficient to have like billion of paths in there.
Basically, so don't use this unless you have some sort of legacy code that you need to get to work, but try and avoid this at all costs.
So it's like marked as deprecated. We won't remove it, but it's just a tag to say, please don't use it. So then, when you basically run this composer install or update, it generates these files for you, like vendor autoload.php, and that registers this autoloader that is pre-configured with all the package autoloading rules, etc. So it knows how to load all your packages, and you really shouldn't have to care about it. So all you really do is require it, this vendor autoload file, and that's all. Like require, done.
Yeah. And then you just use all the classes from any of the packages, and it'll just know how to load those. So you'll never again have to deal with where is this file, how do I require from which directory, but you just use the classes available in those packages without thinking about it.
And should you really, really not want to use autoloader for some reason, some people do, it's fine. You just don't require the class. Like, don't require the file, and it won't be there. It's okay. Because we get those questions like on a weekly basis, I think. Then finally, one nifty feature is that the autoload file is returning the class loader instance. So you can, like, when you require it, it returns the value. So something you may not know about, but it's one of those PHP features. But so what you can do is basically take the return value and then add some namespaces to it, which can be useful for tests. If you have like the tests in another directory, you probably want to do that in your test bootstrap and not add it to the package config, because otherwise you're basically like adding more info than is necessary in everyone's installs. Like everyone that depends on your package will have more stuff. So that's not really good.
Okay, so we've seen that packages can be loaded from packages. Now, Composer isn't a centralized system. You don't have to have your packages in packages. Jordi mentioned in the beginning that there's also a project called Status, which makes it very simple to have small separate repositories where you publish your own packages. Especially useful if you want to work on something internally that shouldn't be accessible to the outside world. And the way to define these so that Composer is able to find packages in those places is using a repositories key in your Composer.json file, which looks something like what you see here. There are different types of repositories. The Composer type is what packages, for example, provides and what Status provide, and which just need a URL for where that thing is located. There are further types like VCS. You can load a package directly from your Git repository without any intermediary step, which is useful in development situations, or if it's just an individual one. It's not that great if you want to load a lot of packages, because just to find the meta information about like all these Composer.json files with the metadata about their requirements, dependencies, you would already have to clone that entire repository and look for them. So it's useful in development situations every now and then, but it's not something to use for everything. And the last part there, if you don't want to use open source packages from packages, you can entirely disable packages using packages false. Yeah, and like as it notes at the end, our documentations, to which there's a link later, lists more ways of using these custom repositories. And there's one further thing. Not every project out there is using Composer yet, and specifically projects that aren't really PHP. So let's say you have some project where you have a dependency on jQuery or something. Then like jQuery is probably not going to add Composer.jsons to their packages, because for them it's really not that interesting. There's also a way to specify these packages within your own Composer.json as external packages, and that's what you see here. It's basically a special package type repository. And then what you see in there is the same thing that would be provided otherwise by packages or status. You specify the dist URL, which is typically like a zip file, tarball, and if available, source to be able to use prefer source to clone a repository directly. And that way, further down in your own requirements, you can use this package and it'll download the version that you've specified. Oh yeah, I should mention something about the note there in the beginning. You cannot do, like if you do this in your package and you publish it, these additional repositories will not be loaded by other projects that depend on yours. The reason for that is that for that to work, for example, on packages, Composer would have to go to every single package on packages, look for all the repositories they load all of those repositories, check if there are any packages in there, load all of those repositories, etc. Like this is a very complicated, very long, very slow process. So instead, you can only define external repositories within your main Composer.json of your project. And if you use some library that depends on an external dependency, you will have to define that repository in your own Composer.json again.
All right. So we now want to just give you a quick overview about the current state. First of all, we have, well, that was the last count I did like 2 weeks ago, I think. So we had 90 contributors, which is really awesome, I think, for
like the project is about a year old. I think we should add that. Like so, like around last April, we started working on this, and it's grown really quickly. Like
about 100 contributors is really amazing. I don't know. I guess there are a few in the room, so thank you guys. Now, in terms of adoption, we have more than 1,500 packages on Packagist, which is quite cool. Especially the growth rate, like last month was plus 450, which is really a lot. In terms of comparison, like if you look at Node, for example, the NPM has crossed 10,000 packages, I think, a month ago. So we can still increase this a lot, and we need your help for that. But it's already pretty cool. Like 1,500 is a lot, and I already saw a lot of things there that I never heard of before. So it's quite nice. In terms of installs, we had like 350,000 more or less in the last month, which is also quite huge, I think. In terms of version, we're still in alpha, so that sends you a message, I hope. You should not expect too much. I mean, it's getting to work really well, but we're still not like confident enough to mark it stable.
I mean, the upside is obviously this is a tool you use in development, so it's never going to cause you a problem in production. So it's not quite that big a risk to use it as an alpha version as it would be with other projects.
But I think like we really tried to do all the backwards compatibility breaks in the last couple months, I guess. So now we are fairly stable in terms of API, and like things shouldn't move too much anymore. It's just a few things missing, but we're getting there. We have support in frameworks. That's really cool. I mean, as Niels mentioned, Symfony 2.1 will come with it by default, and also Zen Framework 2, if you're interested. I mean, this is not the best place, but
I mean, there even lives like the Facebook PHP SDK added Composer JSON after a lot of people asked for it, for example, or
so
just like all kinds of things that
really,
you might
like,
come across.
The thing is, you should complain to people. Like, really, when you want, like, if some library does not support Composer, then if instead of just defining the repository yourself, like in the custom repository in your Composer JSON, once you did that, you might as well just make it a pull request and
just send it to them. All they need is this Composer JSON file, which typically is like 10 lines at most, probably shorter. So it's really not a whole lot of work for the maintainers. They don't need to maintain anything because that file, once it exists, is all they need because they just have to tag their releases like they do anyway. So it's very little work. So just tell people to add these Composer JSON files to their repository.
And then we have some platform as a service providers that say, we'll do it, but it's a bit slow.
Sort of getting there, but
But it's possible to use it, like with, I know, Pagoda Box, there is like some tutorials for it. I know Pablo from Server Group mentioned that they're trying to do something about that as well, so it's getting there. And then we have, I think, the Typo 3 guys that said they would consider it for installing their plugins, so to basically build their new plugin manager for V5.
Well, we have like a few small examples, like PHP Documenter, I think is an example. So PHP Documenter 2, like the new version, has various templates, and you install those through Composer. So like it's built into it as a library, and you can just use this.
So in terms of roadmap, the main pain point, I think, is this web asset. So as you mentioned, when you have like jQuery, or if you use Twitter Bootstrap, or all of those like front-end side stuff, which obviously will not care about PHP package management, and that's fine, that's fair enough. We need the solution for that, and we have like a couple plans, and we'll see what happens exactly, but
and the other part is also installing them, because typically you don't want to have those in your vendor directory, but you need those somewhere where they're web accessible. So we're working on making that easier. At the moment, you'll have to come up with a custom solution for that.
Yeah, at the moment, I think most people, they basically have a script that runs after the Composer install, and like
they symlink or copy them.
I mean, with Symfony, it's not so bad because most bundles have the files in them, and then you can, like with assets install, it will basically copy them. Then as I said, we're getting there in terms of features. So really, it's just bug fixing. So again, there we need help from people in terms of if only reporting bugs, it really helps.
We have there are problems with some weird situations with proxies, etc., that we just don't encounter ourselves. So if you ever see any of those errors, please report them to us so we can make Composer more stable in all of these environments that we personally might not be using.
And so, yeah, we're targeting a beta this month, hopefully, but yeah, we'll see. And I hope by the end of summer or towards September, we'll have a first 1.0 stable.
Yeah, so last part is, so we've explained to you how all of this works, and we've mentioned a few times, like, ask people to add Composer JSONs to their projects. And the way that we imagine this, that there's really a very clear path to a better PHP world, I would say. So first of all, I would like to ask all of you, if you're working on a new project, if you're trying to add a new feature to your project, look around, see if someone else has already done this. Try and reuse code that others have done, save your own time and money. Now, that'll help yourself. Now, at the same time, this only works if you help others. So when you decide that there's nothing out there that will actually solve your problem or that doesn't quite work like what you need, try and split your problem into very small, individual aspects that you can work on, and then build small libraries that tackle a particular problem and publish them, share them with everyone else, so that whoever else encounters the same situation can just use your readily available code, maybe help you improve it a bit. They might find bugs that you haven't found in there, work together, reuse these things. And if we keep doing that, if we have, like, rather than 1,500 packages, we get to those 10,000. If it becomes normal in PHP projects not to build everything yourself, but to rely on the work that others have done for you, then I think we can build a lot better, bigger, cooler things in less time, spending less money. It'll be good for all of us. So if you want to find out more, these are URLs you should check out. Getcomposer.org is where you download Composer with this little curl line I showed earlier.
Plus the documentation.
And there's the documentation, exactly. So everything that you might need to find out later that you can't think of right now, that you'll encounter while you're working with it, you will find documentation on there. Packages.org is the place to find packages. There's the main feature is the search, where you can find whichever package you're looking for if you're trying to identify something that will solve your problems. If you want to help us, github.com/composer. That's really where all our development takes place. That's the code is there for Composer packages, that is. We have all of the issues there. If you have a bug, report it on GitHub. If you want to send us a pull request, please do. We're very happy if we get those. You can also ask questions on the Composer Dev Google group. There will be people there to help answer your questions. Or if you want to discuss things with us, Composer and Composer Dev are two great channels on Freenode on IRC, where we're typically around, and there are lots of interesting discussions happening there about both the development of Composer and Composer Dev, and just general problems you might encounter with Composer. All right, thank you everyone for listening. 45 minutes.